Beneath 2 miles of solid ice, scientists drilled into a world that should be empty. Instead, something looked back. Creatures with no eyes, forests of stone like life, rivers wider than highways flowing through total darkness. Lakes sealed off for 15 million years, holding things that evolved alone. We thought Antarctica was frozen and dead. We were wrong about almost everything. Today, we descend into hidden oceans, ancient mountains buried in ice, and a lost world only recently revealed. If this kind of mystery pulls you in, hit subscribe so you never miss the next descent. Take a breath. We go down now. In February of 2020, a team from the British Antarctic Survey was doing something nobody had done before. They were drilling through the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf, a slab of ice the size of Spain. Their target sat almost 3,000 feet below the surface. The plan was simple. Lower a camera, collect mud from the seafloor, study the sediment, leave. The drill bit punched through. The water beneath was pitch black and just above freezing. The camera descended slowly, lights cutting a small cone through the dark. For minutes, there was nothing, just empty water. Then the seafloor came into view, and the team stopped breathing. It was not mud. It was a boulder, and the boulder was covered in life. Stationary creatures clung to the rock. Sponges with long stalks, strange filter-feeding animals with no name, things that looked like nothing in any textbook on Earth. The camera operator later said his hands started shaking. They were looking at a thriving community of animals more than 160 miles from the open ocean. No sunlight had touched this place in tens of thousands of years, maybe longer. This should have been impossible. Every model of how life works in the deep sea said the same thing. Animals like sponges need a steady rain of food drifting down from the sunlit surface above. That food source did not exist here. The ice cap blocked everything. The nearest source of floating nutrients was hundreds of miles away across crushing cold currents. Yet here they were, alive, healthy, apparently happy. The lead scientist, Dr. Hugh Griffiths, called it one of the most surprising discoveries of his career. His team had expected mud and maybe a few wandering shrimp. They got something closer to an alien city. The drill site was so remote that getting more samples would take years. The hole they made was barely wider than a dinner plate. The robot arm could not reach the boulder. They could only watch, film, wonder. The questions piled up fast. How did these creatures get there? How long had they been growing? What were they eating? How many more colonies like this were sitting under the rest of the continent, hidden under ice that has not melted in millions of years? The team published their findings the next year. Other scientists read the paper and immediately started arguing. Some said the food must be drifting in through tiny gaps in deep ocean currents. Others suggested the creatures might be feeding on bacteria that pulls energy from chemicals in the rock itself. A third group went further. They proposed that whole ecosystems could exist down there, fed by sources we have not even imagined yet. What is confirmed is this: Antarctica is not empty under the ice. It is alive in places that should be lifeless. And the drill that found this colony only sampled one tiny pinprick of a continent the size of the United States and Mexico combined. The British team is planning to return. They want bigger drills, better cameras, maybe a small submarine, because that single boulder, lit for a few minutes by a camera light, hinted at something far larger waiting in the dark. Something the next discovery would prove was even stranger. The creatures on that boulder broke a rule scientists had treated as law for over a century. The rule went like this: all life on Earth needs the sun. Plants use sunlight to make food. Animals eat the plants or eat the animals that ate the plants. Cut off the sun, and the entire chain collapses. Under the Antarctic ice shelves, the sun does not exist. Light cannot pass through 2,000 feet of solid ice. Below that ice sits black water, then the seafloor. The temperature stays near 28 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Currents move slowly. Nothing photosynthesizes. Nothing grows in the traditional sense. By every old textbook, this should be a dead zone. The sponges and filter feeders found in 2020 did not get the memo. Filter feeders survive by pulling tiny particles of food from the water around them. In a sunlit ocean, that food is plankton, algae, and the waste from millions of swimming creatures. In a dark frozen sea sealed under ice, none of that exists. Or at least, it should not. Marine biologists started running calculations. They tried to figure out how much food would need to drift in from the open ocean to feed the colony they had spotted. The numbers came back strange. The closest open water was so far away that any food particles would be eaten or sunk long before they reached the boulder. The food simply could not travel that far, so either the creatures were starving very, very slowly, or something else was feeding them. Something local. Something we had missed. 3 main theories started circulating. The first involved chemosynthesis, a process where bacteria pull energy from chemicals in rock instead of from sunlight. These bacteria can support whole food webs in the deep sea around hot vents. If similar bacteria existed on or near the boulder, they could be the base of the entire colony. The second theory pointed to ancient currents. Some researchers proposed that thin layers of nutrient-rich water might thread through the dark sub-ice ocean in ways nobody had mapped yet, like underwater rivers carrying food in slow loops. The third theory was the wildest. It suggested the creatures had been growing there for so long and so slowly that they barely needed food at all. Antarctic sponges grow at almost frozen speeds. Some species add only fractions of an inch per century. A creature that lives that slowly might survive on amounts of food that would starve anything else. Each theory has supporters. None has been proven. The colony sits there, indifferent to the debate, doing whatever it has been doing for thousands of years. What this means for the rest of science is enormous. If life can survive in the cold, dark, sealed ocean under Antarctic ice, then the rules for where life can exist need rewriting. Moons like Europa and Enceladus have similar conditions. They have ice shells covering deep oceans. They have no sunlight reaching the water below. For decades, scientists asked whether life could possibly exist in those places. The Antarctic boulder may be the first real evidence that the answer is yes. That is not even the strangest discovery hidden under the ice. Below those waters, sealed for millions of years, sits something even more isolated than the boulder colony, a lake older than the human species itself. Before we get to the lake, there is the river, and the river should not be there at all. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed the bottom of the Antarctic ice sheet was frozen solid to the rock below. Solid bedrock, solid ice, fused together by unimaginable pressure and cold. Nothing could move down there, no water, no life. Just a frozen stone foundation under miles of ice. That picture started cracking in the 1970s when ice-penetrating radar began revealing strange flat patches deep under the ice. The patches reflected radar signals back differently than rock. They behaved like water. By the early 2000s, satellites started spotting something even stranger. Sections of the ice surface, miles wide, were rising and falling by several feet over months. Up, down, up again. The only explanation that made sense was that giant pockets of water were filling and draining beneath the ice. The water had to be going somewhere. Then in 2024, a research team mapping a section of West Antarctica found it. A river, an actual flowing river of liquid water running beneath nearly a mile of ice. The river stretched over 250 miles long. In some places, it was wider than the Thames in London. It had been hidden directly under the surface this entire time. How does a river exist under that much frozen ice? The answer involves heat coming from 2 directions. From above, the weight of the ice itself creates pressure. Pressure lowers the melting point of water. From below, the Earth's natural geothermal warmth seeps up through the bedrock. Together, these forces melt a thin layer at the very bottom of the ice. Over millions of years, this slow trickle has carved channels, pooled into lakes, and built an entire underground plumbing system. The river system connects dozens, maybe hundreds of subglacial lakes scattered across the continent. When one lake fills past a certain point, it spills over into channels that drain into the next lake downstream. The whole network is constantly shifting. Water moves, pressure builds, ice surface bulges and sinks above as a result. The implications go way beyond hydrology. A flowing river means moving nutrients. Moving nutrients mean possible food for life. The river carries minerals, dissolved gases, and bits of rock from one isolated pocket to the next. It could be the highway connecting the boulder colony from Chapter 1 to other hidden communities scattered across the continent. Even more interesting, the river dumps into the ocean at the edges of the ice sheet. That outflow brings sealed-off Antarctic water into contact with the global ocean. Whatever has been growing or evolving down there for millions of years could, in theory, leak out at the coast. Microbes, strange chemistries, possibly things stranger than that. Scientists have only begun to map this hidden river system. The continent is roughly the size of the United States, and we have detailed data on a small fraction of it. There may be dozens of rivers down there, entire subglacial watersheds, a complete frozen world plumbed by liquid arteries. And those arteries lead somewhere extraordinary. They lead into a lake that has been sealed off from the rest of the planet since before our species existed. In the heart of East Antarctica, beneath 2.5 miles of solid ice, sits a body of water bigger than Lake Ontario. It is one of the largest lakes on Earth. Almost no one has ever heard of it. Its name is Lake Vostok. It was discovered in the 1990s by a combination of ice-penetrating radar and satellite measurements that revealed an enormous flat region under the Russian Vostok station. The flatness was the giveaway. Liquid water under ice forms a perfectly level surface in a way that solid bedrock never does. The lake was about 160 miles long and 30 miles wide. Its deepest point dropped over 2,000 feet. Then came the part that stunned researchers. The ice sheet covering Lake Vostok had been in place for at least 15 million years. That meant the lake had been completely sealed off from the surface, from sunlight, from the atmosphere, and from the rest of Earth's water for longer than the entire history of the human family tree. Whatever was inside that lake had been evolving alone, in total darkness, for an unimaginable stretch of time. The pressure inside Vostok is crushing. Over 350 atmospheres of weight press down on the water from the ice above. The temperature hovers just below freezing, but the water remains liquid because of that pressure and the slow heat coming from the rocks below. The lake also has a strange chemistry. The water is supersaturated with oxygen, possibly 50 times more concentrated than ordinary lake water. That much oxygen would be toxic to most creatures we know. If anything is alive in there, it has had 15 million years to figure out how to survive conditions that would kill almost everything else on the planet. Russian scientists spent over 2 decades drilling toward the lake from Vostok Station. The drilling moved slowly, partly because of brutal Antarctic conditions, partly because everyone was terrified of contaminating the lake before they could study it. The drill used kerosene to keep the borehole open. If kerosene leaked into Vostok, 15 million years of isolation would be ruined in a single afternoon. In 2012, after years of careful work, the drill finally broke through into the surface waters of the lake. Pressure shoved lake water up the borehole. It froze in place inside the drill shaft. Samples were retrieved and analyzed. The results were strange. The team identified DNA fragments from organisms they could not match to any known species. Some sequences resembled bacteria found near deep sea vents. Others looked like they belonged to multicellular life, possibly small invertebrates. Critics argued the samples were contaminated. Supporters argued the contamination story did not explain everything. The debate continues. What is confirmed is that Lake Vostok is real, ancient, and almost certainly hosting some form of microbial life that has been evolving in isolation for longer than primates have existed. the lake has not given up its secrets yet. Future drilling, with cleaner techniques and better tools, may finally answer what is swimming in that black water. Vostok is the most famous subglacial lake in Antarctica. It is also far from the only one. There are over 400 others. Lake Vostok turned out to be the first known member of a much larger family. Once scientists knew what to look for, they found lake after lake hidden beneath the Antarctic ice. As of the latest surveys, the count sits at over 400 subglacial lakes scattered across the continent. Some are tiny, just a few hundred feet across. Others are enormous. A handful rival Vostok in size. These lakes are not random pools. Many of them are connected. Researchers tracking surface bulges from satellites started noticing patterns. When one lake drained, another lake hundreds of miles away would fill. Then another. Like dominoes falling in slow motion. Water was moving between them through subglacial channels, sometimes at speeds that surprised everyone. In 2007, a team documented one drainage event that pushed nearly half a cubic mile of water from one lake to another over 15 months. That is a flood the size of a small sea, racing through tunnels under a mile of ice. The lake network creates conditions that biologists find extremely interesting. Each lake is isolated for long periods, then suddenly connected to another lake by a flooding event. The conditions in each lake are slightly different. Different chemistry, different temperatures, different mineral contents from the rocks below. If life exists in these lakes, it would evolve in isolation for thousands of years, then occasionally get mixed with neighbors during drainage events. This is the perfect recipe for evolutionary experimentation. Long isolation lets unique forms develop. Brief mixing spreads new genetics. Then back to isolation. Over millions of years, this cycle could generate biological diversity unlike anywhere else on Earth. A lake called Lake Whillans became one of the first to be sampled cleanly. In 2013, an American team drilled into Whillans using a hot water drill that left no chemical contamination. The lake itself was small compared to Vostok, only about the size of a few football fields, and shallow. The water samples came back loaded with microbial life. Nearly 4,000 different types of microbes were identified. Many had never been seen before. The Whillans microbes were not just surviving, they were actively growing. They pulled energy from chemicals in the rock and from ancient carbon trapped in the sediments. Some were similar to bacteria that thrive near deep-sea vents. Others were something new entirely. The Whillans discovery confirmed what Vostok only hinted at. Life can thrive in subglacial lakes. The conditions, while extreme, are survivable. And if Whillans, a small lake, holds thousands of microbial species, the larger lakes likely hold even more. What about bigger life? Could anything larger than a microbe live in those black waters? Most scientists are cautious. Multicellular life needs more energy than chemosynthesis usually provides. But cautious does not mean impossible. The deep sea constantly surprises us. Subglacial lakes have been off limits long enough that almost any answer remains possible. The most exciting subglacial lake of all may be one that nobody has yet drilled. Lake Mercer, sampled in 2018, returned hints of more complex remains. Tiny carcasses of crustaceans, ancient and well-preserved. Small fragments suggested something larger had once lived in that water, or in waters connected to it. Below the next discovery, scientists found something nobody expected at all. Carcasses of animals that had no business being where they were found. The Lake Mercer drilling project in 2018 pulled up something nobody on the team was prepared for. Lake Mercer is a subglacial lake in West Antarctica, buried under about a half mile of ice. The American team drilling into it expected microbes. They got microbes, plenty of them. They also got something else. Tiny fragments of animals. Crustacean carcasses. Pieces of what looked like tardigrades, the microscopic 8-legged creatures sometimes called water bears. The remains were ancient, partially fossilized, but recognizable. These animals were not supposed to be in Lake Mercer. They were not supposed to have been there at any recent point in geological history, yet there they were, frozen and broken in mud pulled up from a half-mile beneath the ice. The team had two possible explanations. Either these creatures had lived in the lake at some point in the past when conditions were different, perhaps thousands of years ago when the ice retreated briefly. Or they had been carried into the lake by the underground river system, washed in from somewhere closer to the coast, where life is more abundant. Both explanations had problems. The first required ice-free conditions to have existed within the lifetimes of those animals, and the geological record was unclear on that point. The second required the river system to be carrying intact animal remains across enormous distances, which seemed unlikely given the time involved. A third option started getting attention. What if some of those creatures were not ancient at all? What if a few of them were still alive somewhere in the connected lake network and only the dead ones had drifted into Mercer? Nobody could prove this idea, but nobody could rule it out either. Then came the ice cores. Ice cores are long cylinders of ice drilled out of glaciers and ice sheets. They contain trapped air bubbles, dust, and biological material from the time when each layer of ice originally fell as snow. By drilling deep, scientists can pull out samples that are hundreds of thousands of years old. Some Antarctic ice cores reach back nearly 1 million years. When researchers analyzed DNA in some of these old cores, the results were startling. The deepest layers contained genetic material from organisms that, by all known evidence, should not have been alive in Antarctica when that ice formed. Ferns, beetles, tree pollen, microbes from temperate climates. The DNA suggested that Antarctica had hosted very different life in its recent past. Forests, insects, rivers fed by warm rains. The continent we think of as eternally frozen had only become this way somewhat recently in geological terms. A study published in 2022 pushed this further. Researchers analyzed sediment from beneath the Greenland ice sheet, which is geologically similar to parts of Antarctica. They found DNA from a complete forest ecosystem. Mastodons, reindeer, hares, trees. The DNA dated back roughly 2 million years, but it was preserved well enough to identify dozens of species. If similar preservation exists in Antarctic sediment under the ice, an entire lost ecosystem may be sitting there waiting to be sequenced. The genetic ghosts of an Antarctica we have never seen. That ancient world left more than just DNA behind. Some of what it left is still flowing today, staining the ice in a color that earned it one of the most haunting nicknames in all of polar science. In a remote valley in East Antarctica, a glacier weeps a thick, dark red liquid down its face. From a distance, the stain looks like a wound. Up close, it is even more disturbing. The red flow comes from inside the ice itself. It pours out of the glacier slowly, year after year, painting the white surface a deep rust orange. The site is called Blood Falls. It is one of the strangest features on Earth, and for almost a century, nobody knew what was making the ice bleed. The falls were first spotted in 1911 by a British exploration team. The geologist who found them, a man named Griffith Taylor, had no good explanation for the color. The early theory was algae, some kind of red microorganism living in the ice, perhaps similar to the red algae that turned snow pink in alpine regions. Samples were collected. The theory failed. There were no red algae in the flow. Decades passed. The mystery sat unsolved. In 2003, a research team finally cracked the puzzle. The red color was not biological, it was iron. Specifically, iron oxide, the same compound that makes rust on a car. The water flowing out of the glacier contained extraordinarily high concentrations of dissolved iron. When that water hit the air at the surface, the iron reacted with oxygen and turned red almost instantly. The next question was harder. Where was all this iron-rich water coming from? The answer turned out to be a sealed pocket of ancient salt water trapped beneath the Taylor Glacier for at least 1.5 million years. This brine pool sits roughly 1,300 feet below the surface. It is roughly 4 times as salty as seawater, which keeps it liquid even at temperatures well below freezing. It is also nearly oxygen-free, having been cut off from the atmosphere for so long. That brine pool should not just be sitting there. It should have something living in it. And it does. When the brine water was finally analyzed, scientists found a thriving community of microbes. These bacteria pull energy from sulfur and iron compounds dissolved in the brine. They live without sunlight, without oxygen, and at temperatures that would freeze most life solid. They have been evolving in this isolated pool for over 1 million years, completely cut off from the surface world. The microbes leave their fingerprints in the water. As the brine slowly leaks out of the glacier and runs into the open air, it carries traces of those organisms with it. The red color is iron, but the flow itself is essentially blood from a hidden ecosystem. Blood Falls is now considered one of the best models scientists have for what life might look like elsewhere in the solar system. Europa, the icy moon of Jupiter, is thought to have salty oceans beneath its frozen surface. Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, shoots geysers of salty water out of cracks in its ice shell. The conditions inside the Taylor Glacier brine pool are similar to what we expect to find in those alien oceans. If life can survive 1 million years in the dark, salty, oxygen-poor water of Blood Falls, life can probably survive in the dark, salty, oxygen-poor water of a Jovian moon. The microbes in Blood Falls are not the only Antarctic creatures pulling off this trick. Others have taken survival in the dark to even more extreme places. The microbes feeding Blood Falls do something most living things cannot do. They thrive without breathing oxygen. For most animals, oxygen is non-negotiable. Cells use it to break down food and release energy. Cut off the oxygen supply, and the cells die within minutes. The brain shuts down. The body follows. The seizure. Yet across Antarctica, in pools and lakes and pockets of brine sealed under ice for millions of years, entire communities of organisms get along just fine in environments where oxygen barely exists or has been gone for ages. Their secret involves a process called anaerobic respiration. Instead of using oxygen to release energy from food, these organisms use other chemicals. Sulfur compounds, iron compounds, nitrate, even carbon dioxide. The energy released is much smaller than what oxygen-based respiration provides, which is part of why these organisms tend to grow very slowly. But it is enough to live. Some of the Antarctic anaerobes are extreme even by the standards of strange biology. There's a group of bacteria living in subglacial sediments that pull electrons directly from solid rock. They essentially eat stone for breakfast. Electrons flow from minerals in the rock into the bacterial cells, where they are used to power the cell's machinery. The bacteria then dump waste electrons onto other chemicals nearby. This process is so slow that an individual bacterial cell may live for thousands of years before dividing. A bacterium with a 1,000-year lifespan is a strange thing to imagine. While entire human civilizations rose and fell, a single cell sat in the dark, slowly metabolizing rock, waiting. Other Antarctic anaerobes are found in lake sediments where oxygen ran out long ago. These communities form thick mats on the lake floor. The mats are layered, with different species occupying different microscopic levels based on what chemicals each one uses. The top layers handle one type of compound. Lower layers handle another. The bottom layers, where conditions are the most extreme, host the strangest organisms of all. In some cases, these mats have been growing for thousands of years. They build up layer by layer, fossilizing the older layers below as they go. A single mat in a deep Antarctic lake may contain a record of every microbial generation that lived there since the lake first formed. Reading those layers is like reading rings on a tree, except instead of telling about climate, they tell the history of an entire underground ecosystem. The discovery of these communities forced biologists to redraw the boundaries of where life could exist. For decades, the standard view was that complex ecosystems required oxygen. Subglacial Antarctica proved that wrong. Whole food webs can run on chemicals that most students never even learn about in introductory biology. This has direct consequences for the search for life elsewhere. Mars likely had liquid water billions of years ago, but its atmosphere was not oxygen-rich. Any Martian life would have needed to use chemistry similar to what Antarctic anaerobes use today. The deeper subsurface of Mars where some liquid water may still exist, could host similar communities right now. The Antarctic examples give us a template for what to look for and how to recognize it when we find it. Below the ice, life found ways to survive that nobody had imagined. Above the ice, even stranger discoveries waited. Mountains taller than the Alps, completely buried, with secrets of their own. In the heart of East Antarctica, hidden under more than 2 miles of solid ice, sits a mountain range as tall and rugged as the European Alps. It has sharp peaks, deep valleys, long ridges. From the air, none of this is visible. The surface is featureless white. Yet underneath, an entire mountain range stretches for almost 700 miles, completely buried. These are the Gomburtsev Mountains. They were discovered in 1958 by a Soviet team using seismic equipment. The team detected huge variations in the bedrock beneath the ice, mountains where there should have been a flat plain. The discovery was so unexpected that some scientists initially refused to believe it. A mountain range the size of the Alps does not just sit there unknown for billions of years. But the radar data was clear. Something was down there. For decades, the Gomburtsevs remained one of the great unsolved puzzles of Earth science. Mountains form for specific reasons. Tectonic plates collide. Volcanoes build up over hotspots. Crust gets pushed upward by stresses below. The Gomburtsevs sit in the middle of the East Antarctic Craton, a stable slab of ancient rock with no recent tectonic activity. By every theory of mountain formation, they should not exist. In 2009, an international expedition set out to map them properly. The team flew aircraft equipped with ice-penetrating radar across the entire region. They recorded gravity measurements. They did seismic surveys. After months of work, they returned with the most detailed picture of the Gomburtsevs ever assembled. The mountains were stunning. Sharp peaks rose almost 10,000 feet above their bases. Deep V-shaped valleys cut between them. The terrain looked young, fresh, recently carved by rivers and glaciers, even though the rocks themselves were over 1 billion years old. That contradiction was the key clue. Old rocks, young-looking landscape. The team eventually pieced together the explanation. The mountains had originally formed over 1 billion years ago, then eroded down to almost nothing over hundreds of millions of years. About 250 million years ago, the rocks were uplifted again by deep geological forces nobody had previously detected. Rivers carved the new landscape. Then around 34 million years ago, the Antarctic ice sheet began to form. Glaciers covered the mountains and froze them in place. The ice has been protecting them ever since. While mountains everywhere else on Earth have been worn down by wind and rain, the Gomburtsevs have sat preserved under a massive ice blanket. They are essentially fossilized landscape, a snapshot of what mountains looked like 34 million years ago, perfectly preserved. The Gomburtsevs play a critical role in modern Antarctica. The East Antarctic ice sheet started forming on top of these mountains. The peaks acted as anchors, giving the ice somewhere to grab. From there, the ice spread outward across the rest of the continent. Without the Gomburtsevs, the ice sheet might have looked completely different, or might not have formed at all. The valleys between the peaks now hold subglacial lakes and rivers. Some of those lakes connect to the larger drainage system mentioned in earlier chapters. The Gomburtsevs are not just buried mountains. They are the hidden spine of the Antarctic ice sheet. And they are not the only ancient secret the ice has been keeping. Some of those secrets are not mountains. They are bodies. In a corner of East Antarctica called the Dry Valleys, the landscape looks more like Mars than Earth. There is no ice on the ground. No snow. The valleys are dry because powerful winds called katabatic winds rip through them at speeds over 100 miles per hour, carrying away any moisture before it can settle. Temperatures stay cold but never warm enough to thaw anything for long. The result is a frozen desert, possibly the closest thing to a Martian environment found anywhere on Earth. In this brutal place, scientists kept finding something they could not explain. Seal carcasses. Mummified, perfectly preserved, scattered across the valley floors. Some were close to the coast. Others were dozens of miles inland. A few were found over 40 miles from the nearest open water. Crab-eater seals mostly, along with a few Weddell seals. All dead, all looking like they had crawled inland and simply stopped. The seals had been there for a long time. Some carcasses were dated to over 2,000 years old. Others were even older. The dry, cold, windy conditions in the dry valleys preserve organic matter almost indefinitely. A seal that died there 20 centuries ago looks much the same today as it did when it took its last breath. The mystery was not how the seals had been preserved. That part was easy. The mystery was why they had walked so far inland in the first place. Seals are coastal animals. They feed in the ocean, breed on the ice near shore, and rarely venture far from open water. A seal walking 40 miles inland, across rough frozen terrain, with no food source available, makes no sense from a survival standpoint. The seal would have died of starvation long before reaching the spot where its body was found. Yet there they were, over and over, in places they had no business being. Several theories have tried to explain it. The most popular suggests the seals became disoriented during severe storms or whiteouts, lost their sense of direction, and walked the wrong way. Once committed, they kept going. Some researchers think the seals may have been chasing distant smells or sounds that turned out to be illusions of the wind. Others propose that magnetic anomalies in the bedrock could throw off seal navigation. A more unsettling theory involves the seals being caught up in mass disorientation events. Stranded whales sometimes come ashore in groups when something disrupts their navigation. Could similar mass events drive seals to walk inland to their deaths? The fossil record is too sparse to confirm this idea, but it would explain why some dry valley sites contain multiple carcasses in the same area. The mummified seals are more than just curiosities. They are time capsules. Each carcass contains DNA, bones, organ tissues, and traces of stomach contents that can be analyzed. Researchers have used the seals to track changes in Antarctic ocean chemistry over thousands of years. The bones contain isotopes that record what the seals ate. The patterns reveal how the food web in Antarctic waters has shifted over time. The dry valleys hold many strange things. Frozen lakes capped with thick ice, dating back tens of thousands of years. Fields of bizarre rocks shaped by wind and ice into alien forms. Hidden microbial communities living inside rocks and beneath thin layers of permafrost. But the seals are the most haunting. Bodies in a place no body should be. The next discovery is even harder to imagine. Heat. Real heat. Coming from beneath the coldest ice sheet on the planet. For most of human history, Antarctica was thought of as the coldest, deadest place on Earth. A continent of frozen stillness. The idea of fire and lava there sounded absurd. The reality is the opposite. Antarctica is one of the most volcanically active regions on the planet. Most of the volcanoes are simply hidden under the ice. The first hint came in the 1960s, when geologists began finding volcanic ash layers buried inside ice cores. Ash from eruptions that had clearly happened during the time the ice formed. These were not eruptions from neighboring continents. The chemistry pointed to local sources, somewhere on or near Antarctica itself. Then came radar mapping. Using ice-penetrating radar from aircraft, researchers began spotting strange cone-shaped features hidden under the ice. Mountains with the characteristic shape of volcanoes. Some of them showed signs of being recent. The ice above them was thinner, slightly warmer, sometimes domed upward. Heat from below was clearly affecting the ice. By 2017, a major survey of West Antarctica had identified at least 138 volcanoes in that region alone. Most of them were buried under the ice sheet. About 90 of these were previously unknown to science. The discovery turned West Antarctica into one of the largest volcanic regions on Earth, comparable to the volcanic spine of East Africa. Many of these volcanoes are dormant. Some may not have erupted for thousands of years, but others are still active. They produce slow heat that melts the ice from below, contributing to the formation of subglacial lakes. They release gases that bubble up through the ice, A few have erupted in recent geological history, producing the ash layers found in ice cores. The ice sheet hides them well. From the surface, an active volcano under 2 miles of ice looks identical to the ice sheet around it. The only signs are subtle bulges, slight changes in surface temperature picked up by satellites, and the occasional escape of gas or steam through cracks in the ice. The implications for the future of Antarctica are serious. As climate change thins the ice sheet in places, the weight pressing down on subglacial volcanoes decreases. Reduced pressure can encourage volcanic activity. Some researchers worry that a thinning ice sheet could trigger an increase in eruptions, which would in turn melt more ice, releasing more volcanoes from their pressure caps. A feedback loop nobody fully understands yet. The biological implications are even more interesting. Subglacial volcanoes create hotspots in an otherwise frozen landscape. Around their vents, liquid water can persist permanently. The water is rich in dissolved minerals from the volcanic activity. Around vents in the deep ocean, similar conditions support entire ecosystems based on chemosynthesis. The same may be true beneath the Antarctic ice. A research team studying Mount Erebus, the most famous Antarctic volcano, found exactly this. Caves carved out by volcanic heat under the ice contained strange microbial communities. The caves were warm enough to allow liquid water in places. Bacteria thrived on the volcanic gases. Some of the species had no known relatives anywhere else on Earth. The caves themselves were mapped only partially because new ones kept being discovered. The volcanoes under the ice are not just geological features. They are oases. Pockets of warmth in a frozen wasteland, each one possibly hosting its own unique ecosystem. One volcano above the ice is more famous than all the others combined, and what lives in its frozen caves is unlike anything else on Earth. Mount Erebus is the southernmost active volcano in the world. It rises over 12,000 feet above Ross Island, off the coast of Antarctica. Its summit holds one of only a handful of permanent lava lakes on Earth. The lake of molten rock has been bubbling and churning continuously for at least the last 50 years, possibly much longer. Erebus is famous among volcanologists for its strange chemistry. The lava in its summit lake is unusually high in alkalis and produces specific minerals found almost nowhere else. The volcano regularly throws bombs of lava out of its crater. It releases plumes of gas. It is by every measure alive and dangerous. But the most extraordinary thing about Erebus is not at the summit. It is on the slopes. Around the volcano, hot gases escape from the ground in many places. When these gases meet the freezing Antarctic air, the water vapor in the gas freezes almost instantly. Over years and decades, the freezing vapor builds up into hollow towers of ice called fumarole towers. Some of them are over 30 feet tall. They look like alien chimneys rising from the snow, often with steam pouring out of their tops. Beneath these towers, the warm gases carve out cave systems inside the ice itself. The caves can be enormous. Some stretch for hundreds of feet. The interior temperatures can reach above freezing, even though the air outside is well below zero. The caves are bathed in twilight from light filtering through the surrounding ice. Inside, the ice walls glow blue and white. The floor is sometimes warm enough to sit on without freezing. These caves are a unique habitat. They are warm. They are dark or near dark. They are isolated from the surface. They have been forming and reforming for thousands of years as the volcano shifts its activity. And they contain life. A research team studying the Erebus caves discovered communities of microbes living on the cave walls and floors. The microbes were unlike anything found in other Antarctic environments. They survived on the volcanic gases pouring up from below. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and traces of methane all served as energy sources for different microbial groups. What made the discovery especially interesting was the diversity. The caves contained dozens of different species, many of them apparently unique to this single volcano. Some had genetic signatures that did not match any known microbial group anywhere on Earth. They might be entirely new branches of the microbial tree of life, evolved in isolation inside warm ice caves on a remote Antarctic mountain. The Erebus caves serve as another model for what life on other worlds might look like. Mars has volcanoes. Some of them may still have residual heat. If frozen Mars hosts ice-covered volcanoes with warm caves underneath, the same kinds of microbial communities found on Erebus could exist there too. The same goes for Enceladus, which combines ice and warmth in similar ways. Researchers continue to map the cave system around Erebus. New caves are found on most expeditions. The total number of caves is unknown. Some of them may be connected by passages that no human has yet explored. The volcano sits there, silently producing one of the strangest microbial habitats on the planet, while almost no one outside the small Antarctic research community has ever heard of it. Below the warm ice caves, in the cold, dark waters offshore, even older inhabitants have been found, living things that may have been alive when the pyramids were being built. In the cold, dark waters around Antarctica, on the deep seafloor where currents barely move and temperatures hover just above freezing, glass sponges grow. They look like tall cylinders made of delicate, woven silica. Some are taller than a person. Most are smaller. They sit on the seafloor, filtering water for tiny particles of food, doing what sponges have done for hundreds of millions of years. The Antarctic glass sponges have one feature that sets them apart from almost every other animal on Earth. They live for an extremely long time. How long is hard to know exactly. Sponges grow incredibly slowly in the deep cold of Antarctic waters. A common species may add only fractions of an inch per year. Some grow even more slowly. By measuring growth rates and comparing them to the size of large specimens, researchers have estimated that some Antarctic glass sponges are at least 1,500 years old. Others may be much older. A study published in 2012 suggested some specimens could be over 15,000 years old. If those estimates are right, certain individual sponges in Antarctic waters were already alive when humans first started farming. They were alive when the pyramids were built. They were alive when Rome rose and fell. They have simply been sitting on the seafloor, filtering, growing fractions of an inch per century for a span of time that staggers the imagination. Glass sponges are not the only ancient inhabitants down there. Black coral colonies in deep Antarctic waters have been carbon dated to over 4,000 years old. Certain types of sea urchins live for 2 centuries. Some Antarctic clams reach over 500 years of age. The cold, slow waters of the Southern Ocean produce some of the longest-lived organisms on the planet. The reason for the extreme lifespan comes down to the conditions. Cold water slows metabolism. Slow metabolism means slow aging. Energy is used carefully. Cells divide rarely. The damage that accumulates with each cell division is limited. The result is creatures that essentially exist at a slower pace than the rest of the living world. For a glass sponge that grows 1,000 years to reach maturity, the world around it must look almost frozen in time. Currents that shift over decades. Predators that come and go on timescales the sponge can barely register. Even the ice above changes over the course of its lifetime. The sponge, meanwhile, continues to filter water and grow, indifferent to it all. These ancient sponges are also archives. The silica skeleton of a long-lived sponge captures information about the water it filters throughout its life. Trace elements, isotopes, subtle chemical markers. A sponge that has been alive for 10,000 years contains a continuous record of 10,000 years of ocean chemistry locked into the layers of its skeleton. Researchers can read these records like rings on a tree. What they have found is troubling. The deep Antarctic waters are changing. Chemical markers in sponge skeletons show shifts in oxygen levels, temperature, and acidity over the past century. These shifts are happening faster than at any other time in the sponge's life record. The ancient creatures, in their silent way, are documenting the transformation of their world. There is one Antarctic creature even stranger than the glass sponges. Something so unusual that scientists could not classify it when they first found it. A creature shaped like a perfect star. In 2012, a research team operating a remotely operated submarine off the Antarctic coast captured video footage of something they could not identify. The creature was sitting on the seafloor, several hundred feet below the surface. It was about the size of a dinner plate. It had a flat, symmetrical body shaped almost exactly like a five-pointed star. Each arm tapered to a delicate point, but it was not a starfish. It did not move like a starfish. It did not have the tube feet of a starfish. It did not match any known species of sea star, brittle star, or basket star. The team watched the creature for a long time. It barely moved. It seemed to be feeding by absorbing particles from the water. Its surface had a strange pearly sheen that did not match anything in their reference databases. After collecting samples and consulting with marine biologists around the world, the team published a paper acknowledging that they had no idea what they were looking at. The creature was eventually classified provisionally as a new species, possibly a new genus, possibly even a new family of marine animals. The classification debate continues. Some researchers think it might be a deeply evolved relative of basket stars. Others believe it could be a completely separate evolutionary lineage that branched off hundreds of millions of years ago and survived in isolation in the Antarctic deep. This is part of a much larger pattern. The Southern Ocean around Antarctica is one of the most isolated marine environments on Earth. A circular current called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current flows around the continent, walling off Antarctic waters from the rest of the world's oceans. The current has existed for roughly 34 million years. During that time, life inside the Antarctic seas has evolved largely on its own, separated from the marine life of the rest of the planet. The result is a marine ecosystem unlike any other. Many Antarctic species have no close relatives anywhere else. Whole groups of fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and other creatures have evolved to fit niches that nothing else on Earth occupies in the same way. Sea spiders the size of dinner plates, fish with antifreeze proteins in their blood, crustaceans that grow far larger than their relatives elsewhere because of the cold water gigantism phenomenon. Estimates suggest that as many as 2/3 of the species living in Antarctic seas have not yet been formally described by science. Most of them are tiny, but many are large. The number of completely unknown species in the Southern Ocean may be in the tens of thousands. Each new expedition tends to find creatures nobody has documented before. Some are minor variations of known species. Others are genuinely new forms. The star-shaped creature was unusual not because it was unknown, which is common, but because it was so visually striking and so resistant to classification. The fact that we cannot classify a dinner plate-sized animal that lives less than 1,000 feet down in waters humans have technically been studying for over a century says something important. The Antarctic deep is genuinely unexplored. We have sampled the tiniest fraction of it. The creatures we have found so far probably represent a small minority of what lives there. Some of the discoveries are even more bizarre when they involve creatures that resemble nothing in our own oceans, but everything in the deep sea vents of the Pacific. Off the coast of Antarctica, deep below the surface, the seafloor is broken in places by hydrothermal vents. These are cracks in the ocean crust where superheated water gushes out, heated by magma below. The water can reach temperatures over 700 degrees Fahrenheit at the vent openings. It is loaded with dissolved minerals. Around these vents, despite the lack of sunlight and the toxic chemistry, entire ecosystems thrive. In 2010, a research expedition exploring vents on the East Scotia Ridge near Antarctica found something extraordinary. Around the vent openings, in massive numbers, were crabs. White hairy crabs covered in dense silky bristles. They piled on top of each other in writhing heaps, each crab competing for the best spots near the warm water. These were Yeti crabs. Specifically, a new species named Kiwa tyleri. The species had never been seen before this expedition. It joined two other Yeti crab species known from vents elsewhere in the world, but it was distinct from both. The Yeti crabs of the Antarctic vents have a strange and fascinating lifestyle. The bristles on their bodies are not just decoration. They are farms. The crabs cultivate colonies of bacteria in their bristles. The bacteria feed on chemicals from the vent water. The crabs feed on the bacteria. To grow more bacteria, the crabs wave their bristles in the vent flow, spreading nutrients across their bristly arms. This means each crab is essentially a walking garden. The crab tends its crops, grazes on the harvest, and adjusts its position in the vent water to optimize bacterial growth. The crowding around the vents is so intense because the crabs need to be in just the right zone. Too close to the vent and the heat kills them. Too far and the bacterial farms starve. The optimal zone is narrow, and competition for space is fierce. The expedition counted densities of up to 700 crabs per square yard around some vent openings. The seafloor was almost completely covered. The crabs piled 3 or 4 deep in places, fighting for position. The Antarctic Yeti crab discovery confirmed something biologists had suspected. The deep-sea vent ecosystems around the world are home to creatures that have specialized to specific chemistries and conditions. Each vent system tends to produce its own variations on the basic theme. The Pacific has its types. The Atlantic has others. The Antarctic, isolated by deep currents, has yet others. The vents themselves are strange enough to deserve mention. The Antarctic vents discovered by this expedition included some of the most extreme found anywhere on Earth. Water gushed from cracks at temperatures hot enough to melt lead. Mineral-rich plumes rose dozens of feet into the cold water before mixing and dispersing. Towering chimneys of crystallized minerals built up around the vent openings, some of them over 30 feet tall. Around these chimneys, beyond the Yeti crabs, other strange creatures lived. New species of barnacles, snails with shells made of unusual minerals, sea anemones in colors not found elsewhere. The vent ecosystems were each their own little universes, fed by chemistry instead of sunlight, isolated from each other and from the rest of the ocean. Some of these vents are still being mapped. The total number of active vent fields around Antarctica is unknown. Each new survey tends to find more. Each newly discovered vent tends to host species that have never been documented anywhere else. Beyond the vents, in the open Antarctic deep, lurks a creature that grew far larger than any of the Yeti crabs. Larger, perhaps, than any other invertebrate on Earth. In the dark, deep waters around Antarctica swims one of the most mysterious large animals on the planet. It is rarely seen alive. Most of what we know about it comes from carcasses pulled up by fishing trawlers, fragments found in the stomachs of sperm whales, and a small handful of accidental encounters with deep-sea cameras. It is the colossal squid. The colossal squid, scientifically called Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, lives in the cold, deep waters of the Southern Ocean, mostly at depths between 1,500 and 7,000 feet. It is the largest invertebrate on Earth by body mass. Mature specimens have been measured at over 1,400 pounds. The longest confirmed specimen was around 45 feet from the tip of its tail to the end of its longest tentacle. That is roughly the length of a city bus. Its eyes are the largest of any animal known to exist. Each eye is about the size of a basketball. The size is needed to gather the tiny amounts of light that filter down to the depths where it lives. With those huge eyes, the colossal squid can probably detect the faint glow of bioluminescent prey, or the silhouette of a predator backlit by the surface far above. Its tentacles are unlike those of any other squid. Each tentacle is armed not just with suckers, but also with rotating hooks. These hooks can swivel and grip prey with incredible force. A struggling fish caught in a colossal squid's grip cannot escape. The hooks dig in deep, and the suckers hold on. The prey is then drawn toward the squid's beak, which is one of the largest beaks of any squid species. The colossal squid's main predator is the sperm whale. Sperm whales dive to depths over 6,000 feet to hunt them, and the battles between the two giants must be tremendous. The evidence is found on the whales themselves. Sperm whales caught for study often show massive circular scars on their heads and bodies. The scars match the size and pattern of colossal squid suckers and hooks. Some whales have hundreds of these scars, evidence of many encounters over the course of a long life. For most of human history, the colossal squid was effectively unknown. The first specimen was identified from fragments found in a sperm whale stomach in 1925. Decades passed before another specimen turned up. Even today, intact specimens are extremely rare. Fishing vessels occasionally catch one. Researchers race to study the carcass before it decomposes. Living colossal squid have been observed only a few times by deep-sea cameras. The footage is brief and dim. The creature appears, often startled, then quickly retreats into the dark. Each sighting adds a tiny piece to a picture that remains mostly blank. What the colossal squid does, day to day, is largely a mystery. How long it lives, how it reproduces, how many of them exist, where their breeding grounds are. All of these questions are open. The animal lives in a place humans can barely visit. Submarines that can reach those depths are rare and expensive. Cameras must be lowered for hours at a time and usually capture nothing at all. The Antarctic deep holds many mysteries. The colossal squid is one of the largest, but size is not always what makes a creature strange. Some of the most remarkable Antarctic creatures are smaller, stranger, and even more bizarre in how they survive, like fish, whose blood looks more like ice water than blood at all. The waters around Antarctica are cold enough to kill almost any vertebrate. The Southern Ocean stays at temperatures between 28 and 30 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That is below the freezing point of normal blood. A fish from temperate waters dropped into Antarctic seas would freeze solid within minutes. Ice crystals would form inside its cells. Its tissues would be destroyed. Death would be quick. Yet the Antarctic seas teem with fish. Many species, large populations, healthy ecosystems. They survive because they have evolved one of the most remarkable adaptations in the animal kingdom. Antarctic ice fish have antifreeze in their blood. The antifreeze is a special type of protein called an antifreeze glycoprotein. These proteins bind to tiny ice crystals as they begin to form in the fish's body. Once attached, the proteins prevent the crystals from growing. Any ice that does start to form stays microscopic. It cannot grow large enough to damage cells or block blood vessels. The fish stays alive at temperatures that should turn its body to ice. Different Antarctic fish species use slightly different versions of the antifreeze proteins, but the basic chemistry is the same. The proteins evolved approximately 10 to 15 million years ago, around the same time the Antarctic circumpolar current sealed off the Southern Ocean and temperatures began to plunge. Without this evolutionary innovation, fish life around Antarctica would have collapsed entirely. The proteins saved an entire ecosystem. One group of Antarctic fish has taken evolutionary specialization even further. The crocodile icefish, also called white-blooded fish, are the only known vertebrates on Earth without hemoglobin in their blood. Hemoglobin is the iron-containing protein that gives red blood cells their color and allows them to carry oxygen. In every other fish, every reptile, every bird, every mammal, hemoglobin is essential. Without it, the blood cannot carry enough oxygen to keep tissues alive. The crocodile icefish manage without it. Their blood is clear, almost transparent, with no red color at all. Cut a crocodile icefish, and the blood that flows out looks like water tinted slightly yellow. The trick involves the cold. In very cold water, oxygen dissolves more easily. Antarctic seawater holds far more dissolved oxygen than warm tropical water. The icefish absorb this oxygen directly through their skin and gills, and it dissolves in the blood plasma rather than being carried in red blood cells. The system works only because the water is so cold and so oxygen-rich. Move the icefish to warmer water, and they would suffocate within minutes. The icefish have other strange adaptations. Their hearts are huge compared to most fish, because they need to pump enormous volumes of blood to deliver enough oxygen. Their blood vessels are wider. Their gills are specialized to absorb the maximum amount of oxygen possible. Every part of their physiology has been optimized for a life without hemoglobin in the coldest waters on the planet. The crocodile icefish are not just a curiosity. They are a window into how evolution can rebuild basic biology under extreme pressure. Losing hemoglobin should be a death sentence for a vertebrate. The icefish prove that under the right conditions, even the most fundamental systems of the body can be reorganized. The Antarctic seas are full of these radical experiments. Fish with antifreeze, fish without red blood, creatures that have rewritten the rules of vertebrate biology over the past 10 million years of cold isolation. What waits in the rest of those waters may be stranger still. In the deep waters of the Ross Sea, far below the reach of any sunlight, lives a fish that has earned a chilling nickname among Antarctic researchers. They call it the white shark of the South. The official name is the Antarctic toothfish, and despite the nickname, it is not actually related to sharks at all. It is a member of the icefish family, a relative of the antifreeze-blooded creatures from the previous chapter, but it has grown to a size and a level of predatory power that earns the comparison. The Antarctic toothfish can reach over 6 feet long and weigh more than 250 pounds. It lives in the dark, cold depths beneath the Antarctic ice, often at depths between 3,000 and 7,000 feet. It is the apex predator of the Ross Sea. Almost nothing hunts it except sperm whales, killer whales, and the occasional Weddell seal that ventures deep enough to find one. Its body is built for the dark. The eyes are huge, capturing every faint glimmer of bioluminescence in the deep. The teeth are sharp and inward-facing, designed to grip prey that has been swallowed and prevent escape. Its lateral line, the sensory organ along its sides that detects vibrations in the water, is highly developed. A toothfish hunting in total darkness can sense the movements of prey from yards away. Its hunting style is patient. The toothfish hovers in the dark water, barely moving, waiting for smaller fish or squid to come within reach. When prey approaches, the toothfish strikes with a sudden burst of speed, swallows the victim whole, and returns to its hovering pose. The whole sequence takes seconds. The toothfish is also long-lived, like many Antarctic creatures. Individual fish can live for over 50 years. Some specimens have been aged at over 70. They grow slowly, especially in the deepest and coldest waters. A 200-pound toothfish has been alive longer than most of the people studying it. The Antarctic toothfish has become commercially important in recent decades. It is sold under the name Chilean sea bass, despite not being a bass and despite often being caught nowhere near Chile. The fishery brought attention and concern. Toothfish populations grow slowly because the fish themselves grow slowly. Overfishing could devastate the species in ways that would take centuries to recover. The toothfish are also key to the Ross Sea ecosystem. They are the main prey of certain killer whale populations. They are competitors for prey with several species of seals and large predatory squid. Removing them from the system would have effects rippling through the entire food web. The Ross Sea Marine Protected Area, established in 2016, was created in part to protect the toothfish and the ecosystem they anchor. Studying living toothfish in their natural habitat is extremely difficult. The depths they inhabit are hard to reach. Submarines that can dive that deep are rare. Cameras lowered on long cables capture only brief glimpses. Most of what is known about the species comes from captured specimens and from indirect evidence like stomach contents of predators. The Antarctic toothfish are not the only large predators hidden in those waters. Other species lurk in the deep, some of them barely studied at all. Some of them carnivorous, in ways that surprise even experienced biologists. Like sponges that hunt instead of filter. For most of biological history, sponges were considered the most passive of all animals. They sat on the seafloor. Water flowed through them. They filtered out tiny particles of food and lived their slow, simple lives, making no decisions, going nowhere, doing nothing more dramatic than absorbing what drifted by. Then in the early 2000s, scientists found something that overturned the entire image of what sponges could be. In the deep, cold waters around Antarctica, researchers identified sponges that did not filter at all. These sponges had no internal water channels, no filter mechanisms, no system for processing seawater the way every other sponge species did. Instead, they had hooks. The sponges were covered in tiny barbed spicules like microscopic Velcro. When small animals brushed against them, the spicules grabbed on. The prey, usually tiny crustaceans or small worms, became stuck. Once trapped, the sponge slowly grew cells around the captured animal. Over hours or days, the sponge digested its prey from the outside in. Eventually, only the indigestible parts were left behind. Sponges had become predators. The discovery happened over multiple expeditions. The first carnivorous sponges identified came from caves and deep waters where filter feeding was not productive. In environments with very little drifting food, evolution had pushed sponges toward a different strategy. Instead of waiting for food to drift by, they captured it actively. By 2024, researchers exploring deeper Antarctic waters had identified additional carnivorous sponge species. Some grew on the open seafloor. Others lived inside underwater caves. A few were found around hydrothermal vents, where drifting food was scarce despite the rich vent chemistry. Each new species used slightly different versions of the basic carnivorous strategy. Some used hooks. Others used sticky threads. A few combined multiple capture methods. The total number of carnivorous sponge species is now known to exceed 100. Most live in deep, cold waters. The Antarctic deep sea has produced a disproportionate number of new species, possibly because the food-poor conditions there encourage the evolution of predatory strategies. This discovery had implications beyond just sponge biology. Every textbook had taught that sponges were passive filter feeders. The textbooks had been wrong, or at least incomplete. A whole branch of the sponge family tree had quietly become carnivorous, and nobody had noticed until researchers started exploring the deepest, coldest, most remote habitats on the planet. It made everyone wonder what else had been missed. If sponges, the most studied of all simple animals, could surprise us this completely, what about other groups? What about creatures even less well known, in habitats even less explored? The answer is unsettling. Almost certainly many other groups of marine animals have evolved unexpected lifestyles in the deep Antarctic. Some have probably been documented in passing without anyone realizing what they were seeing. Others remain completely unknown. The sponge revelation was not just a new discovery. It was a warning that our assumptions about marine life are still full of gaps. Some of those gaps involve creatures that grow to lengths the human mind struggles to picture. Animals so long that early descriptions sounded like exaggeration. One of those animals lives in the Antarctic shallows and stretches longer than a blue whale. In the cold waters near the Antarctic coast, often hidden in tide pools or in shallow sandy bays, lives a creature that holds a strange record. It is not the heaviest animal on Earth. It is not the tallest. But by length alone, it may be the longest animal that has ever existed. Its name is the Bootlace worm. The species is Linnaeus longissimus, and it lives in cold waters around the world, including extensively around Antarctica and the southern oceans. A typical Bootlace worm is a few feet long, but the largest specimens documented have stretched over 180 feet. That is longer than a blue whale, the largest animal ever known to have lived on Earth by mass. The worms are extremely thin. A Bootlace worm 100 feet long might be only as thick as a pencil. Their bodies are dark in color, slimy, and incredibly elastic. They can stretch and contract dramatically. A worm that appears 30 feet long when at rest might stretch to over 60 feet when actively hunting. They are not gentle creatures. Bootlace worms are predators. They hunt other invertebrates by extending a long tubular structure called a proboscis from the front of their bodies. The proboscis can shoot out at high speed and is coated in toxic mucus. The mucus contains a mix of poisons that paralyze and digest prey. Once stunned, the prey is pulled back to the worm's mouth and consumed. The toxin is potent. Studies have shown that the mucus from a Bootlace worm can paralyze small crustaceans within seconds. The active chemicals are powerful enough that researchers have considered them as possible models for new pesticides or even drugs. A few species of Bootlace worm produce mucus that is toxic to humans on contact, causing skin irritation. The Antarctic species are less well studied in this regard, partly because their habitat is so difficult to access. The reproductive lives of these worms are bizarre. They release massive amounts of slime when stressed or threatened. Some species produce slime laced with the toxic compounds as a defense mechanism. The slime can cover the worm in a protective layer that deters most predators. Few animals will try to eat a Bootlace worm twice. How a worm that long manages to function is a fascinating question. The nervous system runs the entire length of the body. Signals must travel from one end to the other through a primitive but functional nerve cord. Coordinating the movement of a 100-foot body without a centralized brain seems almost impossible, yet the worms manage it. They contract along their length in coordinated waves. They locate prey, capture it, and consume it efficiently despite their extreme proportions. The Antarctic populations of bootlace worms are particularly mysterious. Studying long, fragile worms in cold, remote waters is difficult. Specimens are often broken during collection. Life observation in their natural habitat is rare. Most of what is known comes from inference based on better studied populations elsewhere. Some researchers suspect that the Antarctic populations may include the longest specimens ever to have lived. The cold conditions slow their metabolism, allowing them to grow longer over longer lifespans. A bootlace worm in Antarctic waters might live for decades, slowly extending its length each year. The longest specimens may simply be the oldest. The worm is one of many strange Antarctic creatures. Some of the strangest involve animals that became trapped in places they never should have been, like whales caught in holes in the ice with no way out. Each Antarctic winter, as temperatures drop and the sea ice expands, a heartbreaking event sometimes plays out in the southern waters. Pods of whales become trapped beneath the spreading ice. They were swimming in open water one day, hunting and traveling normally. Then the cold accelerated. Ice formed faster than expected. By the time the whales realized what was happening, they were stuck. A whale must surface to breathe. Most species need to come up every few minutes for fresh air. When sea ice forms over a whale's breathing area, the animal is in immediate danger. It must find another opening or face suffocation. In some cases, the whales locate small openings called polynias, gaps in the ice where currents or winds keep the water clear. They survive by surfacing through these tiny windows, sometimes dozens of whales sharing a single hole. The trapped whales of Antarctica face a brutal calculation. The polynias are small, sometimes only a few feet across. Multiple large animals must take turns surfacing. The hole gradually freezes over as the season progresses. Each day, the opening shrinks. The animals work to keep it open by surfacing repeatedly, breaking the thin new ice with their bodies. But the cold eventually wins. Holes that seemed safe in early winter become death traps by late winter. The whales most often affected are killer whales and beluga whales, though other species can be caught too. Beluga whales are particularly vulnerable because they hunt in shallow coastal waters where ice forms most aggressively. Trapped pods of belugas have been documented many times in both the Arctic and the Antarctic regions. Some of those pods are saved when icebreakers can reach them in time. Many are not. In some cases, the trapped whales attract attention from above. Polar bears in the Arctic learn to wait at the breathing holes, attacking whales as they surface. The whales must choose between drowning and being attacked. The same dynamic does not exist in Antarctica because there are no polar bears, but killer whales themselves sometimes prey on smaller trapped beluga or minke whales. The phenomenon raises difficult questions about whale behavior and intelligence. Why do entire pods get trapped? Whales are usually skilled at reading conditions. They know when ice is forming. They know to leave dangerous areas. Yet sometimes whole groups are caught anyway. One theory suggests they are following prey deeper into freezing waters than they should. Another suggests they get disoriented when ice formation is unusually rapid. A third points to social dynamics, where some pod members refuse to leave others behind, even when the others are trapped. Researchers studying these events have learned that the trapped whales sometimes survive for surprisingly long periods. Pods can keep small holes open through repeated surfacing for weeks. They lose weight. They become exhausted. But they survive, often until natural ice movements free them in the spring. The Antarctic ice plays many roles. It provides habitat for some species. It traps and kills others. It hides the deep ocean from view, sealing off entire ecosystems from human study. Beneath the ice, in conditions even more isolated than the pockets where trapped whales survive, microbes do something even more strange. They eat the rock itself, turning solid stone into food. In sediment beneath the Antarctic ice, in subglacial lakes, and in the deep ocean trenches around the continent, microbes thrive in conditions that should not support any life at all. Their food source is not plants. It is not other microbes. It is rock. The process is called chemolithoautotrophy. The word breaks down into three parts. Chemo means chemical. Litho means rock. Autotroph means an organism that makes its own food from inorganic sources. Together, the term describes microbes that pull energy directly from chemical reactions in stone, then use that energy to build their own bodies from carbon dioxide. The microbes do not eat rock the way an animal eats food. They use specialized enzymes to extract electrons from minerals in the rock. The most useful minerals contain compounds of iron, sulfur, manganese, or other elements that can give up electrons under the right conditions. The microbes essentially run a microscopic battery, using the rock as the energy source. In the dark, cold environments under the Antarctic ice, this is the only way for many organisms to make a living. Sunlight is unavailable. Drifting organic material is scarce. Rock is everywhere. The microbes that figured out how to eat rock have a permanent food supply that will outlast any individual organism by billions of years. Some of these microbes leave traces behind. As they extract electrons from minerals, they alter the chemistry of the rock around them. Iron compounds shift their oxidation states. Sulfur compounds change their forms. Carbonate minerals dissolve or precipitate. Over time, the rock around a microbial community develops distinctive chemical signatures that mark where the microbes have been working. Researchers can find these signatures in ancient rock samples. Some of the oldest evidence of life on Earth comes from rocks containing chemical traces left by ancient microbes that ate stone. Similar traces have been found in rocks brought back from Mars by rovers. Though whether they indicate ancient Martian microbial life or non-biological chemistry remains hotly debated. The Antarctic rock-eating microbes are an active research focus precisely because they offer the closest analog to what life on Mars or elsewhere might look like. Mars has rocks. Mars likely had liquid water billions of years ago. If microbial life ever existed on Mars, it almost certainly used chemistry similar to what Antarctic chemolithoautotrophs use today. Studying the Antarctic microbes helps astrobiologists understand what to look for and how to interpret what they find. A few of these Antarctic microbes are extreme even by microbial standards. Some live for thousands of years between cell divisions. They process so little energy that their growth is glacially slow. They sit in subglacial sediments, slowly metabolizing rock, waiting for conditions to change. Their patience is almost incomprehensible by human standards. Others form thick mats on rock surfaces, building up layer by layer over centuries. The mats are visible to the naked eye if you look in the right places. They can be black, green, red, or other colors depending on the chemistry involved. Some mats contain dozens of different microbial species, each occupying its own niche based on what chemicals it can process. The discovery of rock-eating life has changed how scientists think about the deep biosphere. There may be more microbial life inside the Earth's crust than on its surface. Most of it would be similar to what is found beneath Antarctic ice. The Antarctic continent itself was once a very different place. Long before the ice, before the freezing currents, before the dryness, it was home to forests. Antarctica was not always frozen. In its distant past, the continent had a very different appearance. It hosted forests, rivers, lakes filled with fish and amphibians. Dinosaurs roamed across landscapes that received summer sunlight and gentle rains. The transformation from green continent to ice continent took millions of years, and the evidence of the older Antarctica still lies preserved in the rocks. Fossilized leaves have been found in Antarctic sediments dating back over 50 million years. The leaves come from plants that lived in temperate forests, beech trees, conifers, ferns. The fossils show patterns of seasonal growth, with rings indicating warm summers and cool winters. These were not tropical jungles. They were cool temperate forests, similar to what grows today in southern Chile or in parts of New Zealand. The fossil record extends much further back. Fossils from over 250 million years ago show that Antarctica then was part of the supercontinent Gondwana, connected to South America, Africa, India, and Australia. That ancient Antarctica had subtropical climates in places. Massive trees grew. Ferns spread across forest floors. Early reptiles and mammal-like creatures stalked the underbrush. Dinosaurs lived there too. Multiple dinosaur fossils have been found in Antarctica, dating to roughly 200 million years ago and continuing through to the end of the dinosaur age 66 million years ago. Among them was a small herbivore called Cryolophosaurus, found near the South Pole region in 1991. The fossil included a distinctive crest on the dinosaur's head, earning it the nickname Elvisaurus. Other Antarctic dinosaur finds include sauropods and various smaller predators. The forests began to die when Antarctica drifted to its current polar position. As the continent moved south, it became colder. Eventually, a powerful ocean current called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current formed around it, isolating Antarctic waters from warmer flows. Temperatures plunged. The forest retreated. Ice began to form on mountain peaks, then expanded into the lowlands. Over millions of years, the entire continent froze, but the freezing was not perfectly continuous. There were periods of warming that allowed limited plant life to return. Recent research has identified evidence of these warm phases in ice cores and sediment layers. During some of these warm periods, parts of Antarctica may have been ice-free for thousands of years at a time. Pollen samples from sediment cores show that low-growing plants like grasses, mosses, and small shrubs colonized exposed land during these intervals. The most striking evidence comes from a study published in 2017. Researchers analyzing sediments from beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet found pollen and spores indicating that a temperate rainforest had existed in West Antarctica around 90 million years ago. The forest grew in conditions similar to modern New Zealand, with mean annual temperatures around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The discovery pushed back estimates of how recently parts of Antarctica had been forested. Underneath the current ice sheet, the remains of these ancient ecosystems lie buried. Trees may be preserved in sediment. Fossil bones of dinosaurs and other ancient creatures could be lying just beneath the ice, waiting for future technologies to retrieve them. The frozen continent is essentially a giant time capsule, holding the records of its own dramatic transformation. What lives beneath the ice today may include descendants of those ancient ecosystems, microbes that survived the freezing, tiny invertebrates that found refuge in subglacial pockets, possibly even larger forms in places we have not yet explored. The geography under the ice is just as interesting. Hidden mountain ranges, buried valleys, and in some places, vast cavities filled with seawater that nobody knew about until very recently. Thwaites Glacier is one of the largest and most studied glaciers in Antarctica. It sits in the western part of the continent, draining a massive area of ice into the Amundsen Sea. The glacier is sometimes called the Doomsday Glacier because of its potential to contribute dramatically to sea level rise if it collapses. Its current rate of ice loss is alarming. Researchers monitor it closely. In 2019, a study using satellite radar and ice-penetrating sensors revealed something nobody had expected. Beneath the front of Thwaites Glacier, a massive cavity had formed where the ice had melted away from the bedrock. The cavity was enormous. It measured about 2/3 the size of Manhattan and stood almost 1,000 feet tall in some places. The volume could have held about 14 billion tons of ice. Most of it had melted away in only the last 3 years. The discovery shocked researchers. They had known that Thwaites was losing ice. They had not realized that a hollow space the size of a city could open up underneath the glacier so quickly. The cavity meant that warm ocean water was reaching deep beneath the ice, melting it from the underside far faster than melting from the top surface. The implications were serious. A glacier sitting on bedrock is relatively stable. A glacier floating on water, especially water that is actively melting it, is unstable. As more ice melts from below, the glacier loses its grip on the seafloor. It can begin to retreat rapidly. If Thwaites retreats far enough, its collapse could destabilize neighboring glaciers, leading to widespread loss of West Antarctic ice and a rise in global sea levels of several feet over coming centuries. The cavity itself created a strange new environment. A vast underwater chamber existed where solid ice had been only years before. The chamber was dark, cold, and filled with seawater. The walls were melting ice. The floor was bedrock that had been pressed under glacial ice for thousands of years. What might be living in such a space? In 2023, an international expedition called MELT lowered a robotic submarine called Icefin into the waters beneath Thwaites. The submarine was small, designed to fit through narrow boreholes drilled in the ice. It carried cameras, sensors, and sample collectors. For the first time, humans got a direct look at the world inside the cavity. The footage was stunning. The submarine traveled through an underwater landscape that looked alien. Walls of ice, currents of dark water, strange formations of sediment on the seafloor, and life. Small creatures that scuttled across the bottom. Fish swimming in the dim light from the submarine's lamps. Microbial mats coating the rocks. The expedition documented species that had never been seen in this environment before. Some of them appeared to be unique to the cavity. Others were familiar Antarctic creatures that had somehow made their way into the newly formed space. The ecosystem was thriving despite having existed for only a few years. Life had moved in quickly to colonize the new habitat. The Thwaites cavity is a window into a future that may become more common. As Antarctic ice melts, more cavities will form. More underwater spaces will open up beneath glaciers. Each one will become a new habitat, briefly hosting whatever life can move in before the ice above collapses entirely. The melting also reveals something unexpected: methane. Vast reservoirs of it, trapped beneath the ice for thousands of years. Beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, in sediments that have been frozen for tens of thousands of years, vast quantities of methane lie trapped. Some of this methane has been there since before the last ice age. Some is even older. The exact total is unknown, but estimates suggest that the methane stored beneath Antarctica may rival the methane stored in permafrost across the entire Arctic. The methane has multiple sources. Some comes from ancient organic material buried under the ice. Microbes have been slowly breaking down this material for thousands of years, producing methane as a byproduct. Other methane comes from geological sources, seeping up from deep within the earth and getting trapped beneath the ice. The methane has been mostly stable for a long time. The cold and the pressure of the ice above have kept it locked in place. In some cases, it forms structures called methane hydrates, where methane molecules are caged inside ice crystals. The hydrates are stable as long as conditions stay cold enough. Warm them up, and the methane is released. Antarctica is warming. Not as fast as the Arctic, but fast enough that researchers are paying close attention to what might happen to the methane reserves. If significant amounts of methane were released into the atmosphere, the climate effects could be severe. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, much more potent than carbon dioxide over short timescales. But there is another twist. Microbes have been found that consume methane as their food source. These methane-eating microbes, called methanotrophs, live throughout the Antarctic subglacial environment. They thrive wherever methane is being produced or released. They essentially eat the methane before it can escape into the atmosphere, converting it into less harmful compounds. A study of an active methane seep beneath the Ross Sea, published in 2020, documented a methanotroph community in detail. The microbes formed dense mats around the methane vents. They were consuming methane at rates that significantly reduced the amount escaping into the surrounding water. The Antarctic ecosystem had its own built-in defense against methane release. The defense is not perfect. The microbial mats took years to form fully after the seep was discovered. During that time, much more methane escaped than would have if the mats had been in place from the start. If new seeps form rapidly as the ice retreats, the microbes may not be able to keep up. Methane could escape faster than they can consume it. Researchers have been mapping known and suspected methane seeps around Antarctica. The number is growing rapidly. New seeps are found on most major expeditions. Some are small, releasing only modest amounts of gas. Others are large, with vigorous bubbling and visible plumes of dissolved methane in the water above them. Each seep is its own ecosystem. The methanotrophs form the base. Other microbes process the byproducts of methane consumption. Larger creatures, including small invertebrates and even some fish species, feed on the microbial communities. The whole assemblage is similar in some ways to the ecosystems around hydrothermal vents, but driven by a different chemistry. The methane seeps and the methanotroph communities they support are reminders that Antarctica is full of dynamic living systems. The continent is not a frozen museum. It is an active biological landscape, with ecosystems forming, changing, and disappearing as conditions shift. Some of those ecosystems exist in places that nobody could have predicted, like the ones found beneath the floating ice shelves at the edge of the continent. In 2021, a team of New Zealand researchers were drilling through the Ross Ice Shelf, a massive floating slab of ice the size of France. They were drilling at a remote spot far from any open water. The ice shelf at this location was about 1,100 feet thick. Below the ice was a layer of cold, dark seawater approximately 1,000 feet deep before it reached the seafloor. The team was studying the dynamics of the ice shelf and the water below. When the drill broke through into the water, the camera lowered into the borehole captured something unexpected. Tiny creatures swam past the camera. Lots of them. Small crustaceans called amphipods, scattering through the water like flies in a beam of light. The water was supposed to be a barren, empty layer, far from any nutrient source. Instead, it was teeming with life. The discovery prompted a rapid reassessment of what could survive in such isolated waters. The drill site was hundreds of miles from open water. No sunlight reached this layer. Food should have been almost non-existent. Yet the amphipods were not just present. They were abundant. The team puzzled over how this was possible. The most likely explanation involved water currents that flowed through the layer beneath the ice shelf. These currents could carry small amounts of nutrients from the open ocean far into the interior. Over time, even small amounts of food could support a community of small filter-feeding creatures, especially if the creatures grew slowly and required little energy each day. The amphipods themselves became the focus of detailed study. They were related to species found in other Antarctic waters, but appeared to have adapted to the specific conditions of the Undershelf environment. Their bodies were slightly different. Their behaviors were specialized. They might have been a distinct subpopulation that had been isolated under the ice for thousands of years. Other expeditions to similar locations beneath ice shelves have found similar results. The ecosystems are not as rich as those in open Antarctic waters, but they are present. Each new drilling location tends to reveal additional species. Each set of samples brings new questions about how life can sustain itself in such isolated places. The ice shelves themselves are massive. The Ross Ice Shelf alone covers an area larger than Spain. Other major shelves like the Filchner Run, the Larsen, and the Amory cover additional vast areas. The combined undershelf habitat exceeds the size of many countries. Most of it has never been sampled directly. The few drilling sites that have produced samples represent tiny pinpricks in an enormous unknown territory. What lives in the unsampled regions? The general consensus is that similar communities probably exist throughout the undershelf environment, varying in detail from place to place, but all consisting of slow-growing microbes and small invertebrates supported by minimal nutrient flows. But surprises remain possible. Each new drilling expedition could reveal completely unexpected ecosystems. Larger creatures may exist in places where nutrient flows are richer. Strange organisms could have evolved in pockets that have been isolated for very long periods. The undershelf world is fragile. As ice shelves melt and break apart, the conditions in the waters beneath change rapidly. Currents shift. Nutrients flow in patterns that did not exist before. The ecosystems that have been stable for thousands of years could be disrupted within decades. Some of the creatures found beneath the shelves are surprisingly large. Sea spiders the size of dinner plates, for instance. In the cold waters around Antarctica, on the seafloor at moderate depths, walk creatures that look like they came straight out of a nightmare. They have 8 long, thin legs, a small central body, a tubular mouth used to drain prey of its bodily fluids. They move slowly across the seafloor, occasionally pausing to feed on slow-moving prey like sponges, anemones, or soft corals. These are sea spiders. They are not actually spiders. They belong to a separate group of arthropods called pycnogonids, related distantly to true spiders, but with their own evolutionary history going back over 400 million years. They live in oceans around the world, but the species in Antarctic waters are by far the largest. A typical sea spider in temperate waters might be the size of a fingernail. The Antarctic giants can have leg spans of over 12 inches, sometimes reaching close to 1.5 feet. Their bodies are still small compared to their legs, but the overall size is impressive. Looking at a giant Antarctic sea spider walking across the seafloor is one of the more disturbing sights in deep-sea biology. The size is part of a larger phenomenon called polar gigantism. Many invertebrate groups have larger species in cold polar waters than in temperate or tropical waters. The reasons are still debated, but the leading theories involve oxygen availability and slow growth. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water. Larger bodies require more oxygen, so the abundance of oxygen in cold water removes one of the limits on body size. Slow growth in cold water also means animals can keep growing for longer periods, potentially reaching larger sizes than their faster-growing tropical relatives. Sea spiders have several strange features beyond their size. Their digestive system extends into their legs. The intestine is so long that it cannot fit in the small body, so it threads through the legs as well. When a sea spider digests a meal, parts of the food are essentially being processed inside its limbs. Their reproduction is also unusual. The males of most sea spider species carry the eggs after fertilization. Females lay the eggs onto specialized appendages on the male, called ovidures. The male then carries the eggs around with him for weeks or months until they hatch. This makes sea spiders one of the few groups where the male takes on the primary parental care role. The Antarctic giants are no exception. Large males can be seen on the seafloor carrying clusters of eggs, looking like they have additional body parts attached. Studying Antarctic sea spiders is challenging. They live at depths that require specialized equipment to reach. Catching them without damage is difficult because their long, thin legs break easily. Keeping them alive in captivity is even harder because they require very cold water and very low metabolism rates. Researchers who have managed to study them have learned that Antarctic sea spiders can live for many years, possibly several decades. They grow slowly, eating their slow-moving prey at a leisurely pace. They reproduce every few years. They contribute to the broader Antarctic seafloor ecosystem in ways that are still being mapped out. The total number of Antarctic sea spider species is unknown. Each major expedition tends to find new ones. The polar gigantism phenomenon makes them particularly visible compared to smaller invertebrates, which is part of why so many have been documented. But many more probably remain hidden in places that have not been thoroughly explored. The Antarctic seafloor also hides other strange creatures, some that have lost biological systems, other animals consider essential. In the dark, cold waters around Antarctica, certain fish have lost their colors entirely. They are translucent. Light passes through their bodies almost as if they were made of glass. Internal organs are faintly visible through the skin. Bones show as pale lines beneath transparent flesh. Looking at them in clear water, they almost disappear. These are members of the icefish family, related to the antifreeze-blooded fish from earlier chapters. Several Antarctic icefish species have evolved transparency as a survival strategy. In dark waters with limited light, transparency makes them harder to see. Predators looking for the silhouette of prey against any faint background light may miss a translucent fish entirely. The Antarctic icefish have additional strange adaptations. As mentioned earlier, the crocodile icefish have lost their hemoglobin. Their blood is essentially clear. Some species have also lost their red blood cells entirely. Their immune systems have been reorganized. Their hearts are larger than normal to compensate for the inefficient oxygen transport. Every system in their bodies has been adjusted for the cold, dark conditions of Antarctic waters. One particular species, the blackfin icefish, takes the transparency strategy further than most. Its body is almost completely transparent in the front. Only the eyes and a few internal structures are visible. The tail has some pigment, allowing it to blend with the dim light filtering down from above. The fish hovers in the water column, almost invisible, waiting for prey to swim within striking range. Their hunting style is patient. The translucent icefish do not chase prey across long distances. They lie in wait, conserving energy. When a smaller fish or crustacean approaches close enough, the icefish strikes with sudden speed, snapping up the prey before it can react, then back to motionless waiting. The transparent fish have to deal with one specific challenge that other Antarctic fish do not. Their bodies cannot rely on dark pigments to protect against ultraviolet radiation. In normal fish, dark pigments in the skin absorb ultraviolet light before it can damage the cells beneath. Transparent fish lack this protection. In waters where ultraviolet radiation can penetrate from the surface, they would suffer significant cellular damage. The icefish solve this problem by living deep enough that ultraviolet radiation is mostly blocked by the water above them. They also produce specialized molecules in their tissues that absorb harmful wavelengths. The combined strategy keeps them safe from the ultraviolet damage that would otherwise affect their transparent bodies. The evolution of transparency in Antarctic fish has been studied extensively. Genetic analyses suggest that the pigment genes were turned off relatively recently in evolutionary terms, possibly within the last few million years. The change happened multiple times in different fish lineages, suggesting that transparency offered a strong survival advantage in Antarctic conditions. Whenever a fish population could benefit from being harder to see, evolution found a way to produce transparent variants. The transparent icefish are part of a broader pattern. Antarctic waters have produced many specialized adaptations that exist nowhere else. Each adaptation tells a story about the unique pressures of life in the coldest seas on Earth. Loss of pigment, loss of hemoglobin, antifreeze proteins, extreme longevity. Each adaptation by itself is interesting. Together, they paint a picture of a marine ecosystem unlike any other. Beneath the dark waters, in the sediment of the seafloor, even older communities have been growing for so long that they may contain organisms older than complex life itself. In subglacial sediments and in deep, cold lake bottoms across Antarctica, mats of microbial life have been growing for incomprehensibly long periods. Some of these communities may have been growing continuously for hundreds of thousands of years. A few, maybe even older. The exact ages are difficult to determine because microbial mats do not produce easily datable structures. But the chemistry and the slow growth rates suggest some mats have been forming since long before the modern Antarctic ice sheet existed. The mats are layered. The top layer contains the actively growing microbes. They feed on whatever nutrients are available. Below them, older layers represent generations that have died and been compressed by the weight of newer growth above. The deepest layers contain microbes that lived many thousands of years ago. The mat is essentially a living fossil, with each layer recording a moment in microbial history. Some Antarctic mats contain microbial species that are very old in evolutionary terms. The mats are dominated by groups of bacteria called cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are among the oldest forms of life known to exist on Earth. The first cyanobacteria appeared roughly 2.5 billion years ago. They were among the organisms responsible for filling the Earth's atmosphere with oxygen, transforming the planet from a place hostile to most modern life into the world we know today. The cyanobacteria living in Antarctic mats today are descendants of those ancient organisms. They have evolved over billions of years, but their basic biology is similar to what it was when they first appeared. They use similar pigments. They run similar biochemical pathways. They form similar mat structures. Looking at an Antarctic microbial mat is like looking at a snapshot of what the Earth's ecosystems looked like billions of years ago, before complex animals or plants existed. Some Antarctic mats have been studied in extraordinary detail. The mats in Lake Untersee, a perennially ice-covered lake in East Antarctica, are particularly famous. The lake has been sealed off from the surface by ice for thousands of years. The mats on its floor have grown undisturbed for that entire period. Researchers studying them have identified hundreds of microbial species, many of them new to science. The Untersee mats have unusual features. They form towering structures called pinnacles, some of them several feet tall. The pinnacles are built layer by layer over centuries, with each layer adding a tiny bit of height. They look like miniature underwater hills. The shapes are determined by the growth patterns of specific microbial species, and by the way water currents flow across the lake bottom. Similar mats exist in other Antarctic lakes. Some are smaller, some are flatter, some have different colors due to different microbial communities. But the basic concept is the same. Microbial life has been growing continuously in these places for thousands of years. The mats represent some of the most stable and longest-lived ecosystems on Earth. The Antarctic mats have implications for the search for life elsewhere. If life ever existed in the lakes that may have once existed on Mars, similar microbial mat structures might have formed. Some Martian rocks may contain fossilized remains of such mats. Researchers studying the Antarctic examples are developing techniques to identify similar fossils on other worlds. The mats also remind us that life on Earth is far more ancient and persistent than human history. While civilizations rise and fall in centuries, the microbial mats of Antarctica continue their slow growth. They will likely continue long after every human structure has crumbled. The Antarctic mats are tiny compared to another biological phenomenon visible from space: a swarm so vast it changes the color of the ocean. In the waters of the Southern Ocean around Antarctica swims a small shrimp-like creature that may be the most numerically abundant animal on Earth. It is the Antarctic krill, scientifically Euphausia superba. Each individual is only about 2 inches long, but the total number of them is staggering. Estimates put the global Antarctic krill population at roughly 400 million tons of biomass. That makes them collectively heavier than the entire human population on Earth. Krill swim in massive groups called swarms. A typical swarm can stretch for miles and contain billions of individuals packed together. The largest swarms have been so dense that they tinted the surrounding water red or pink, visible even from satellites in orbit. From space, observers have spotted krill swarms covering hundreds of square miles of ocean. The krill are the foundation of the Antarctic food web. Almost everything else in the Southern Ocean depends on them in some way. Whales eat krill. Seals eat krill. Penguins eat krill. Fish eat krill. The few species that do not eat krill directly eat the species that do. Without krill, the entire Antarctic ecosystem would collapse. Each krill is a tiny filter feeder, eating microscopic algae and other plankton from the water. They form the link between the smallest life in the ocean and the largest. A blue whale can eat several tons of krill in a single day during the feeding season. The krill, in turn, have eaten massive amounts of plankton to reach that size. The flow of energy from sunlight through plankton through krill to whales sustains life across the entire region. The krill swarms are not random gatherings. They are carefully coordinated. The krill use vision, water movement detection, and chemical signals to maintain swarm cohesion. They turn together. They change direction together. They respond to threats together. A predator approaching a swarm might face a writhing wall of millions of small bodies that suddenly shifts as one, making it nearly impossible to target individuals. The swarms also perform a daily migration. During the day, krill stay deep in the water column, hiding from visual predators. At night, they rise toward the surface to feed on plankton that lives near the top. This vertical migration involves billions of animals moving up and down through hundreds of feet of water every day. The movement is one of the largest biological migrations on Earth, repeated daily across vast areas of the Southern Ocean. Krill have other strange features. They can shrink in size when food is scarce, essentially reverse growing to conserve resources. When food becomes plentiful again, they grow back to normal size. This shrinking and regrowing trick lets them survive long periods of food scarcity that would kill most other animals. The total population of Antarctic krill has fluctuated significantly over recent decades. Climate change is altering the conditions they depend on. The sea ice they use as habitat during early life stages is shrinking. The plankton blooms they feed on are shifting in timing and location. Some studies suggest krill populations have declined by as much as 80% in some regions since the 1970s. Other studies show smaller declines or stability. The picture is complicated. The implications of krill decline would be massive. Every species that depends on krill would suffer. Whale populations could crash. Penguin colonies could starve. The entire Antarctic ecosystem hangs on this small crustacean and the swarms it forms. While krill swarms move silently through the water, other Antarctic mysteries are anything but silent. Strange sounds rise from the deep, and nobody knows what makes them. The waters around Antarctica are noisy. Whales sing. Seals call. Ice cracks and groans. Storms thunder above the surface. The cold seas have a constant background of acoustic activity. Researchers using underwater microphones, called hydrophones, have been recording these sounds for decades, building libraries of what Antarctic waters sound like. Most of the sounds can be identified. The songs of humpback whales are unmistakable. The calls of killer whale pods. The grunts of Weddell seals. The rumble of ice movement. Even the ocean currents themselves produce identifiable acoustic signatures. Trained ears can identify the source of almost any recorded Antarctic sound. But there are exceptions. Periodically, the hydrophones pick up sounds that nobody can explain. The most famous example is a sound called the bioduck. It was first recorded in the 1960s by submarines operating in Antarctic waters. The sound was a repetitive quacking noise, almost like a duck calling, but produced underwater at a depth where no duck could exist. The sound recurred in patterns that suggested a biological source, but identifying the species responsible took decades. The mystery was finally solved in 2014. Researchers attached recording tags to Antarctic minke whales and confirmed that the whales were producing the bioduck calls. The whales were the source all along. They had been making this distinctive sound for as long as people had been listening, but identifying the connection required actually placing recorders directly on the whales themselves. Other Antarctic sounds remain unexplained. Hydrophones have recorded long, low-frequency moans that do not match any known species. Sharp pulse-like calls that come in repeating patterns. Eerie howling sounds that seem to come from nowhere in particular. Some of these could be unknown species. Others could be familiar species making sounds that have not been identified yet. Some might be geological in origin, produced by movements of the seafloor or releases of gas from deep below. In 2017, an unusual sound was recorded by hydrophones in the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, far from Antarctica. The sound, called the Western Pacific Biotwang, took years to attribute. Researchers eventually concluded it was probably produced by Bride's whales, but the identification was tentative. Similar mysteries exist in Antarctic waters. Some of the strangest recordings come from beneath the ice shelves. Hydrophones lowered through boreholes have picked up sounds in the dark waters under the ice that have no obvious source. Whether these come from creatures, from movements of the ice itself, from interactions between water and rock, or from something else entirely, remains unclear. The acoustic environment beneath Antarctic ice is poorly mapped. The sounds recorded there may include species that have never been seen, or geological processes that have not been documented. The ice itself produces a remarkable range of sounds. As ice forms and breaks, it generates cracks, pops, groans, and rumbles across a wide frequency range. Ice sheets shift, glaciers calve. The constant motion of frozen water against itself creates an underwater soundscape that varies dramatically by location and season. Some of the sounds resemble musical instruments. Others sound like distant explosions. For animals that live in Antarctic waters, this acoustic environment is part of their world. Whales and seals navigate by sound. They communicate over long distances. They hunt using echoes. The sounds of the ice and the calls of other creatures form the soundtrack of their daily lives. For humans listening from outside, the recordings provide a strange window into a world we can otherwise barely access. That world holds even more secrets. As warming continues, more ecosystems beneath the ice are being revealed. In early 2025, a piece of the Antarctic ice shelf called the George VI Ice Shelf experienced a major calving event. A large chunk broke off and drifted into the open ocean. The break exposed an area of seafloor that had been covered by ice for an unknown but very long period. Researchers from a Schmidt Ocean Institute expedition were operating in the region at the time. They quickly redirected their vessel to investigate the newly exposed area. What they found stunned them. The seafloor that had just been uncovered was teeming with life. Not microbes scratching out a marginal existence, not isolated single organisms. A complete ecosystem with sponges, sea spiders, anemones, octopuses, fish, and many other species. The ecosystem appeared to have been there for a long time, despite being completely cut off from sunlight by the ice cover above. The sponges were particularly impressive. Some were enormous, suggesting they had been growing for many decades or longer. Sponges grow extremely slowly in cold Antarctic waters. A sponge several feet tall might be hundreds of years old. Some of the specimens documented during the expedition could be thousands of years old, having lived their entire long lives in total darkness beneath the ice. The discovery was reported widely in scientific journals and in news media. It confirmed in dramatic fashion what the 2020 boulder colony had hinted at. Life beneath Antarctic ice can be far richer than anyone had previously imagined. Whole ecosystems can exist in places where every model said they could not. The implications for understanding life on Earth are significant. Vast areas of the Antarctic continent have been covered by ice for millions of years. If complete ecosystems can exist beneath ice that has been in place for that long, then the total biodiversity of Antarctica may be enormously greater than current estimates. Most of it would be hidden, inaccessible until the ice retreats or breaks. The implications for understanding life on other worlds are even more striking. The conditions beneath Antarctic ice shelves are similar in many ways to the conditions on icy moons in our solar system. Europa has an ice shell covering a deep ocean. Enceladus does too. The recent Antarctic findings suggest that complex multicellular life could potentially exist in those alien oceans, not just microbes. The biological universe may be much more inhabited than we have assumed. The expedition that made the 2025 discovery is likely just the beginning. As Antarctic ice continues to retreat in various places due to climate change, more areas of seafloor will be exposed. Each newly exposed area could contain similar, hidden ecosystems. Each could reveal species that have never been seen by human eyes. The window of opportunity to study these ecosystems is limited. Once exposed, they will gradually transform as conditions change. Documenting them quickly is essential. The Schmidt Ocean Institute and other organizations are planning more expeditions to other recently calved areas. The technology for studying these environments has improved rapidly. Remotely operated vehicles can now navigate through cracks in ice and explore beneath floating shelves. Sampling techniques have become refined enough to collect specimens without destroying their context. The Antarctic continent is revealing itself to be far more biologically active and diverse than the frozen wasteland of popular imagination. Beneath the ice lies a parallel world of strange creatures, ancient ecosystems, and unexplored mysteries. We are only beginning to glimpse what is there. The vast majority of it remains unexplored, and that vast majority contains things we cannot yet imagine. After everything covered so far, after every astonishing discovery and every shocking ecosystem and every creature that broke the rules, there is one final thing to face. Almost everything beneath Antarctica is still unexplored. The discoveries we have made represent a tiny fraction of what is there. The 99% that remains hidden could contain things stranger than anything we have yet seen. The Antarctic continent covers about 5.5 million square miles. Most of that area is buried under ice. The ice averages over a mile thick across the continent. In some places, it is more than 2 miles thick. Beneath all that ice lies bedrock, sediment, lakes, rivers, mountain ranges, and possibly entire ecosystems that nobody has ever sampled. The boreholes drilled through the ice over the decades number in the hundreds, not the thousands. Each borehole accesses a tiny circular spot the size of a dinner plate. The total area of seafloor or subglacial bedrock that has been directly observed through these boreholes is microscopic compared to the total area of the continent. Every borehole tends to find something new. The pattern strongly suggests that thousands of new discoveries await every additional borehole that future expeditions can drill. The deep waters around Antarctica are similarly underexplored. The Southern Ocean covers an enormous area, much of it at depths beyond easy reach. Submarines that can dive to extreme depths are rare and expensive. Camera surveys of the seafloor have covered only a tiny fraction of the total available area. Most of the deep Antarctic seafloor has never been seen by human eyes or by any kind of camera. What might be there? The honest answer is that nobody knows. Past discoveries can guide our guesses. Each new exploration tends to find species that have never been documented. Each new habitat type tends to contain creatures that have evolved to fit it. The deeper and more isolated a habitat, the more likely it is to host organisms unique to that specific place. By those patterns, the unexplored Antarctic deep should contain many thousands of species not yet known to science. Some of those species could be large. Antarctic waters have already produced the colossal squid, the giant sea spiders, the bootlace worms longer than blue whales. The pattern of polar gigantism suggests that other large invertebrates may exist in places not yet sampled. The deep Antarctic could contain crustaceans, mollusks, or worms of sizes that would surprise even experienced biologists. Other unknown species could be microbial but ecologically significant. Subglacial environments may host microbes that play important roles in global cycles of carbon, nitrogen, and methane. Their full impact on the planet's chemistry is unknown because we have not yet identified or studied most of them. The hidden ecosystems may also include connections we have not yet imagined. Underground rivers connecting subglacial lakes may carry organisms between isolated habitats. Hidden hotspots from buried volcanoes may support thriving communities in places we have not yet detected. Layers of sediment beneath the ice may contain fossils of ancient ecosystems, including possibly the remains of species that have gone completely extinct. The Antarctic continent is also likely to keep changing rapidly as climate continues to warm. Ice will retreat. New habitats will be exposed. Ecosystems that have been stable for thousands of years will be transformed. The window for discovering and documenting what exists beneath the ice may be limited. The next few decades may be the last chance to explore many of these hidden places before they are altered beyond recognition. What lies beneath Antarctica is far more than anyone imagined a generation ago. Boulder colonies in total darkness. Forests of glass sponges thousands of years old. Lakes sealed off for 15 million years. Rivers wider than the Thames flowing through the dark. Methane seeps, volcanic caves, translucent fish, mummified seals, ancient DNA, buried mountains, and so much still hidden. We were completely wrong about what lives beneath Antarctica. We are still wrong.